Welcome to a new episode of Ancient History 101. I'm your host, Alexandra Sills. We're going to be talking the OG Roman Emperor today, and I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation. In fact, it was so good I didn't want to edit it down, so I've split it into two halves for you. You are listening to part one. When this episode is finished, you can walk the dog, have a cup of coffee, and then come back for part two. But let's start at the beginning, shall we? We have a big topic today, and for this we need one of our expert guests. Would you like to introduce yourself for us, please?
Certainly. My name is Dr. Mike Beer. I'm a classicist. I'm an honorary research fellow at the University of Exeter. I'm also an associate lecturer at the Open University.
Wonderful. Mike is going to talk us through everything Augustus, everything that we ever wanted to know. So I think the first question is Augustus is obviously a huge name, lots of name recognition. But if we look at the history, sometimes we see different names being used. So can you tell us about Augustus when he was still Octavian, please?
Okay, right. So we don't know him as Augustus until 27 BC, which is when he changes his name to Augustus. Previously, he had been known to us as Octavian, though that's not what the Romans would have called him. He starts off as Gaius Octavianus Thurinus, and he's born in 63 BC. And he remains that name for approximately 18 years, and then he is adopted by Julius Caesar in Julius Caesar's will, and thereafter he starts calling himself Gaius Julius Caesar. So it can get quite complicated in the text when we start seeing references to Julius Caesar. Is it Julius Caesar? Is it going to be Octavian?
What do we know about his real biological family to start off with?
Very little. We know that he is the son of Attia, who's Julius Caesar's niece. So, in fact, originally Julius Caesar is more distant than we would normally think. So, Octavian is his great nephew. And the only reason that he really crops up is because Julius Caesar hasn't got a male heir at this point. Well, he has got one, but it's Caesarion, his child with Cleopatra, who doesn't count for legal reasons. He had a daughter, Julia, but she died in childbirth. So he's got no male heirs to take over. So he ends up adopting Octavian.
So in Octavian's youth, is he seeing Julius Caesar all the time? Are they a really close-knit family, or is there something that kind of a relationship that develops as Octavian suddenly starts being needed as a potential heir?
We don't have huge sources on this. The sources that tend to talk about this period are much later. We're talking about Suetonius writing about 150 years after all this. We know that he was going through the same process that men of his social class would do in terms of a career progression. He was out serving with Julius Caesar's armies, sort of late teens, but I wouldn't necessarily say they were really close, really. It was a surprise when his name appeared in the will. It wasn't an expected thing.
Because that's something that we should really bear in mind, isn't it? We think of Augustus as this kind of the man who ruled the Roman Empire, but to begin with, he's quite a small fish in a big pond, and I think that's something that we can easily forget, right?
Absolutely. He's somebody that would have probably had a sort of a mid-range political life if the Republic had carried on in the way that it had carried on. He would have gone up the political ranks. You know, he might have gone quite high, but there was nothing to suggest that he would have been anything special.
Right, that's really interesting. So we know all about Julius Caesar's assassination. Where is Octavian when this happens, and what does he do when he realizes his great uncle has been murdered?
Well, again, the sources are slightly vague on this. He's not in Rome, but he does return to Rome. But there is turmoil in Rome at the at Julius Caesar's assassination. There is chaos. There's absolute chaos. The people who assassinate Caesar, and there are a number of them, largely led by Brutus, they assume that the death of Caesar will mean the whole system before Caesar was a dictator would go back to the way it was. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And what happens is there is a huge popular backlash against the assassination of Caesar. There are riots. There are, huge scenes of violence in Rome. So it's a very, very difficult situation. When the will is read, Octavian's name is a bit of a surprise, not least to Mark Antony, who was largely expecting that he would be the person that would be the next person to fulfill Caesar's roles, and that wasn't going to be the case.
So do we know, and if we do we know if Octavian and Mark Antony had met each other before this happened? Would they have interacted at all?
It's possible that they might have met each other. It's not really clear from the sources. It would have been in passing, I suspect, because Mark Antony was very close to Julius Caesar, so they would have probably been in the same social circles. But Mark Antony will not get on well with Octavian at all initially, because there's huge rivalry. Mark Antony is the consul of that year. He's been Caesar's deputy in Gaul. He is very, very experienced. Most people would have said that he was the natural successor to Julius Caesar. And then this 18-year-old boy appears who's got no name, no kind of political cachet. And Mark Antony is both shocked and very, very annoyed.
I think I would be. So Octavian is coming back to Rome. How is it then that this young kid is able to suddenly become a rival of this huge political power?
Well, there is one particular reason, and it is the name. It is simply by taking on the name of Julius Caesar, he immediately attracts the loyalty of all those people that were connected to Caesar, particularly the military veterans. So they see the son, adopted obviously, but the son of Caesar, and that cachet means that many of them will go on to follow Octavian. And also as well, in the will, Julius Caesar has provided for large cash payouts to the citizenry of Rome, and that is expected, and that's what Octavian will go on to do, and that will cement a lot of loyalty as well.
So Mark Antony has the experience, but he doesn't necessarily have the name recognition or the cash to seal the deal.
Yeah.
But Octavian isn't taking complete power straight away. It sounds like it's quite a long process. So how does he set about kind of setting himself up as a rival?
Okay, so as you quite rightly say, it's not immediate. They are both rivals for Caesar's inheritance, as it were, in terms of power and name. But they also both want to do one thing, which is avenge Caesar's assassination, which means that they're both going to be wanting to fight what they would call the liberators, the assassins of Caesar. Initially, they don't realize that they have to get together to do this. So right at the beginning of all this, they are very much enemies. Mark Antony will go off up to the north of Italy to take on provinces. Octavian then will raise an army to go and fight against Mark Antony. It looks like there's going to be another civil war. And then suddenly, to the surprise of everyone, they do a deal. They do a deal together. They bring one other person in called Lepidus, and they form what is going to be known as the Second Triumvirate. So even though initially they are at loggerheads, they realize that to fight against Brutus and Cassius, they need to do a deal and pool resources. And that's exactly what they do.
So just for anyone who isn't aware, what is a triumvirate in ancient Roman politics?
When we talk about a triumvirate, we usually use this on two occasions. The first time we use it, we talk about the first triumvirate, which is a collection of three people. The first triumvirate is Julius Caesar, Crassus, Marcus Crassus, and Pompey the Great. And they are three men that come together to do a sort of a private deal where they arrange things so that they all mutually support each other in terms of their goals. It's an unofficial thing, so you won't see any references in the text to the first triumvirate. However, we also know the second triumvirate, and this is the one that is an official thing. There are laws to put it into place, and it is these three individuals who will rule the Roman world for approximately 10 years. And that's what
Okay.
a triumvirate is.
With both triumvirates, just because they're working together, should we assume that they are working well together and that they're getting on?
I would probably say not. Generally speaking, the three usually become two. One person is usually excluded or dies. So with the first triumvirate, Crassus is the first to go. Crassus dies fighting against the Parthians. The Parthians are what we would have known as the Persians, the people who come after the Persians. He dies in 53 BC. And so there's only Pompey and Caesar left, and then they start to fall out. And it's the same thing with the second triumvirate. There are three of them, and then one of them is going to be subtly moved out, and that will be Lepidus. And by the mid-30s, it's just Mark Antony and Octavian.
So is Lepidus excluded for a particular reason? Can we see any kind of machinations behind how it happens?
He sort of shoots himself in the foot, really. I think Lepidus is aware that he's slightly the third person down, and in 36 BC, he decides that there is a sort of a civil war that goes on between the triumvirate and one of the sons of Pompey the Great, Sextus Pompey. Sextus Pompey is defeated, and then Lepidus thinks, well, this is a good time now for me to kind of make a power play, take a bit more land, get a bit more influence. Doesn't succeed. He's exiled, and he lives the rest of his life in southern France. He's out.
Right, so there's two left.
Yep.
We've already seen that in the previous generation, when there's two left, it doesn't end well. How do they work? Mark Antony and Octavian, how are they working as a duo now? Are they both in Rome all the time?
No, they're definitely not both in Rome. There is a division of territory. Essentially, Mark Antony will be sent off east. Well, sent off. He elects to go east. And when we talk about the east, we're talking about the Greek-speaking world, whereas Octavian will take charge of the west, Italy, Gaul, etc. And the reason for that is that east there's more money. There's a huge power base there. Antony has a lot of allies there. And of course, it's in the east that he's going to meet Cleopatra, which is going to be a big bone of contention between Octavian and Mark Antony.
Sure. Okay. So Mark Antony's out in the east, getting rich, having fun, having girlfriends. What's Octavian doing in the west?
Octavian is at certain points making himself rather unpopular because he has to deal with quite a lot of the problems that are going on in Italy. One of them is land settlements for veterans. So after the defeat of Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42, he has to settle all the veterans that fought in those campaigns back in Italy, and he has to take land from other people to give to the soldiers. It makes him massively unpopular. In 41 BC, there is a big rebellion against him, which is bizarrely led by Mark Antony's brother and Mark Antony's wife at the time, Fulvia. It's put down, but Mark Antony's loyalty is, shall we say, a bit suspect at this point. So Octavian and Mark Antony sort of form an extra compact. They intermarry. So Mark Antony is married off to Octavian's sister, Octavia.
Okay. So, I mean, we're very used to kind of the idea of political marriages across history. This sounds like it's a pretty important one. Is Octavian married at this point?
Well, Octavian ends up being married 3 times. His first wife is Claudia. We don't know too much about her. His second wife is Scribonia, and that's who he'll have his only child with, and that will be Julia. His third wife will be Livia, and we know a lot more about Livia.
So Mark Antony is marrying his sister, but at this time it doesn't sound like Octavian is marrying into Mark Antony's family.
No,
Okay.
not at the moment. But it's having political marriages is always a way of sealing political deals. It means that everything's much closer. But it will be a problem because when he's married to Octavia, Mark Antony will also be seeing Cleopatra and having children with her.
Awkward. So not only is this guy a rival, but he's also cheating on his sister.
It's one of the things that Octavian will use in his propaganda battle against Antony throughout the 30s. He will say that Mark Antony is insulting his honor. He's also betraying a good Roman woman with a foreign woman and playing up to sort of Roman ideals about xenophobia and all those sorts of things. So, yeah, it's one of the things that Octavian will use against Antony, that it's an insult to Octavian's honor.
Sure. So all this time, Mark Antony is out in the East doing his thing. Is it a fair assessment to say that Mark Antony is just having fun, or does it sound like he's actually being quite a politically savvy person working in the eastern half of the empire at the time?
He is doing things out there that are politically important. He goes on a campaign against Armenia. He does attempt to retrieve the standards that were lost against the Parthians by Crassus. He's not particularly successful, but he is doing things. But if you look at the later sources, they tend to follow Octavian's line, which is essentially saying that he's on holidays and on an extended holiday, hanging out with Cleopatra, having fun. But he's got a lot of support. It's easy to forget this. When they eventually do go head to head and fight each other, the majority of the Senate are behind Antony because they think he's more likely to win. He's the more capable general. Octavian is very much unproven, and his abilities as a general will be slightly suspect for a long time. Octavian and then Augustus will portray himself as a great military commander, but the sources seem to suggest that's not true at all, and that many of his victories are won by other people. So he's a good commander-in-chief, possibly, but he does delegate a lot. And there are sources that say that he does run away from battles, so that he's mysteriously sick before big battles, or he's absent from the battlefield. How far we can believe them, it's unclear, but certainly at the time, very much what is said in the sort of the public message is that he's a great commander, that he does wonders. He's like Alexander the Great, but say 100 years on, and people are saying, well, no, he's not that really. He has lots of capable people around him. He's good at delegating.
Right. And we'll be talking more about how he kind of curates his image later on in the discussion. For now, I want to talk about the rivalry with Mark Antony and it sounds almost like jealousy of Mark Antony at certain points. When Octavian is talking about Mark Antony, specifically with Cleopatra, it sounds like he's really making quite personal attacks. Why do you think that is? Why does he make it so personal?
There is a very personal element to their rivalry, but I think if we put it in terms of the culture at the time, these sorts of personal attacks are very much part of the way that politics is done. An example would be is if you look at the speeches of Cicero. So, for instance, we've got the great statesman and lawyer Cicero. We have lots of evidence of the way that he conducted court cases and the invective that goes on in those speeches particularly against women, but generally, insulting people in the most crude ways about their sexual habits, their personal life, things that you wouldn't ever do now, really, that you wouldn't countenance. So this personal nature is part of the sort of the rhetoric of the day. He's also trying to whip up a sense of outrage against Antony. He's playing to prejudices that Romans have about people from the East, but also about the way that you conduct yourself. So Antony's sexual adventures with this foreign queen taps into ideas about self-control, which he doesn't have, about people from the East who are distrusted very often. So I think part of it is playing up to prejudices that his audience will have and that he wants to play on and he wants to encourage. And you will see this much later on with the sorts of stuff that comes out about Cleopatra, the sorts of stereotypes, the tropes about, foreign women and sorcery and Egyptian religion. This is all stuff that's being used as part of the propaganda machine that Octavian is starting to develop in the 30s.
So just to recap, Mark Antony is out in the East. He's
Yeah.
cheating on Octavian's sister.
Mm-hmm.
He's got this foreign girlfriend who just happens to be a queen of a foreign power. We can kind of guess, can't we, that this is going to end badly for one of them. What's the catalyst for Octavian saying, I'm not going to work with you anymore? We are now officially enemies.
The thing that really kicks it off, I think, is something that happens in 34 BC, and it's known as the Donations of Alexandria. A little bit of context. Octavian is particularly annoyed that Mark Antony has 3 children with Cleopatra. So he's got children. Mark Antony's got children with Octavia as well, and they are sort of seen as legitimate children. But he's got 3 children with Cleopatra. He's got Cleopatra Selene, Alexander Helios, they're twins, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. So these 3 children are recognized, obviously, in Egypt as being legitimate, but the Romans don't see them as legitimate at all. And in 34 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra have a little ceremony in Alexandria. They dress up as Egyptian gods. They dress up as Osiris and Isis. And Mark Antony announces that he's handing over large numbers of territories in the East that are either Roman or are likely to be Roman in the future to his children by Cleopatra. And he seems to imply that any future Roman capital that would be ruled by him would be based in Alexandria.
Oh, okay. Now, Mark Antony's best mate, Julius Caesar, we can argue that he was eyeing up monarchical power, and that's one of the reasons he was assassinated. And now Mark Antony, his right-hand man, sounds like he wants to start a dynasty, a royal dynasty. That can't have gone down well in Rome. How does Octavian react to it?
What Octavian does then is he decides to play on this. It's seen as being massively treasonous to be saying these sorts of things. So what he does is and this is probably something that is illegal, but what he does is he persuades the people that hold on to the wills of important people, the Vestal Virgins. These are sort of like Roman nuns, essentially. They look after the wills of the aristocrats. And what Octavian does is he gets the Vestal Virgins to reveal the contents of Antony's will. And part of that content says that Antony wants to be buried in Alexandria. And he uses this as the pretext to say, well, actually, right, this is he's beyond the pale now. We're going to go to war. So yeah, he basically, Octavian will increase his patriotic image by saying that Mark Antony is a traitor. He is trying to, make Rome an Egyptian thing, that he's going to move everything to Alexandria, that it's going to be a royal dynasty, as you say. We know that the Romans haven't had kings for 500 years. This is something that is truly shocking for Romans, we think, and therefore this will be the catalyst for the war between them.
And it's worth mentioning, isn't it? Egypt isn't part of the Roman Empire at this point.
It is not
a foreign country.
It's been eyed up by the Romans pretty much since about the 60s BC. Pompey the Great has got lots of connections there. It's likely that it would have come into Roman hands at some point, and we could always argue that Cleopatra and all the things that she does is designed to protect Egypt, because she can see that it's a strategic place that, Romans will want to have. It's got, the resources of the Nile Delta, the huge amounts of grain that can be grown there. So she is we think, doing deals. She's forging relationships with Julius Caesar, with Mark Antony, as a way of protecting her country. It's as a strategist, as a piece of political activity. It's a really, really understandable thing that you want to do this. So, but it's definitely not part of the Roman world at the moment. It's on the edge. It's almost going to be taken over, but no, it is an independent kingdom.
So Mark Antony, who's been a consul, which, prime minister or president equivalent, being quite open about wanting to be buried in a foreign country with his foreign girlfriend, that's awkward. I suppose it would be really, really easy for Octavian to capitalize on that. After he's made all of these attacks on Mark Antony's private life, what happens to turn it from an argument of words into an argument of armies?
Well, what Octavian does, and this is what we have from later sources, is that he essentially gets the people of Italy to swear an oath of allegiance to him. And he frames it as not just a sort of a tiff between two politicians. He frames it as a culture war. And this is something that he's going to do throughout the aftermath of the Battle of Actium, the battle that they conduct between each other. It will be seen as protecting Roman culture from the influence of Cleopatra. So it will be framed as you'll be speaking Egyptian, you'll be worshipping Egyptian gods. It's seen as a real moment of crisis. And that's the clever thing that Octavian does. He just takes it from being what could be seen as yet another civil war, and he's very keen that nobody thinks of it as a civil war. That's something that you will definitely see throughout Octavian and then Augustus, that civil wars are a thing you don't talk about. But he'll frame it as a war against a foreign enemy. And you see that repeatedly in the poems that come out after Actium, the way that Cleopatra is framed as an existential threat to Roman values.
So let's talk about the Battle of Actium. First of all, where is Actium?
Actium is off the coast of western Greece. It's sort of just at the point where Greece goes into Albania. It's not a hugely important place. As far as we know, there was a temple of Apollo there. But other than that, there's no significance to it. It is, of course, often the case that Greece is used as a place where Romans go and fight their civil wars. So when Julius Caesar and Pompey were fighting against each other, they also go to Greece as well. Philippi, Battle of Philippi, that was also in Greece. Don't trash your own country, go and trash somebody else's when you're having a civil war.
Yeah, it's keep your own territory tidy.
Exactly.
Everywhere else is covered in bodies. So what kind of battle was Actium?
It's a sea battle, largely, and it is a sea battle that is actually more likely to have gone Mark Antony's way because he had by far the greater number of ships. He had the support of many Eastern kings. He had, the greater troop numbers. It was expected that Antony would have won, and I think that was the feeling amongst the Roman Senate. Many senators went over to Antony's side. Of course, what Antony didn't have was a general that Octavian had, a general called Marcus Agrippa, who goes on to be possibly the most important person in the regime, certainly up to maybe 15 BC, something like that.
So we've got the prelude to a battle. It looks like fortune is going to favour Antony because, Antony's got quite a lot of battlefield experience. He's got experience in commanding armies and navies, so he's older. Octavian is the young person. He's not really been proven yet. What is it about that battle that turns the tide on its head? Why is Octavian winning this battle that everyone thinks he's going to lose?
There are two factors. The generalship of Marcus Agrippa is generally seen as something that is hugely important, the strategies that he uses. But the other thing that emerges from later sources is simply the fact that Antony makes a huge error in the fact that Cleopatra leaves the battle and Antony follows her, and nobody can quite work out why he would have done that. It's very strange. It is hard to work with some of the sources because some sources are clearly very anti-Cleopatra, and they do frame it as Mark Antony being sort of like a slave to his emotions in terms of Cleopatra, like his brain has
Right.
gone all kind of clouded because of this love, this passionate love that he has for Cleopatra. But she leaves the battle and he goes as well. It's a huge tactical error, and that essentially is why he loses. If he'd stayed, things would have possibly been very different.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Roman military commanders at this point, we always talk a lot about the loyalty of the troops. For the people on Mark Antony's side who he's left behind, how are they reacting to being abandoned by their commander who they've got this huge admiration for?
Shock, I think, is the basic word. Absolutely shocked. I mean, many of these soldiers will have followed Antony all the way from his days in Gaul. So Julius Caesar's in Gaul, conquering Gaul throughout the 50s. Mark Antony's there at his side. So we're talking, 20-year veterans, absolutely shocked. And again, the blame will go to Cleopatra. Cleopatra will be seen as the person that has ruined this Roman, and that is the narrative. Mark Antony was a great Roman, ruined by Cleopatra. Though interestingly enough, that is never something that's said about Julius Caesar. The whole management of the image of Julius Caesar is protected from all this. Julius Caesar's essentially done the same sorts of things.
I mean, exact same mistress.
Exactly the same. They've all had children with her, and yet Octavian is very, very careful not to bring Julius Caesar into any Cleopatra arguments, as it were. He's left out. So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy, I think, going on there in terms of, being quite happy to insult Cleopatra when it's connected with Mark Antony, but being very careful to leave it out when he's talking about Julius Caesar.
And can we see anyone noticing this hypocrisy or calling him out on it?
Well, I think we can say that the reign of Augustus is marked by a huge amount of hypocrisy. I think that there would have been many people around him who would be seeing the double standards going on, but they're letting it go. And there will be reasons why they're letting it go. I can't believe that there weren't people very close to Augustus just thinking, well, he's saying one thing, but he's definitely not doing that. But they're willing to let it go. And there are reasons for that, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, I think if it's a civil war, there are certain hills that you decide to die on, right?
There are, as I say, I mentioned before that he doesn't like to talk about civil wars because there have been many civil wars throughout the last sort of 60, 70 years. There have been a number of civil wars. Obviously, he wants to try and avoid implying that he started another one, which he has done. And he certainly won't want later on to imply that that his success was largely down to winning civil wars. So he's very careful to kind of avoid talking about. So Cleopatra will be seen as a foreign enemy. Antony is left out of quite a lot of the accounts of Actium till quite late on. He's not mentioned. He's just referred to as the husband of that woman and the husband of this witch, because he wants to tell the public that it's a foreign war, not another civil war.
Okay, so it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the kind of history of the way Mark Antony has been written, in this period, we're told that he was drinking a lot, there were a lot of feasting, revels, and that his relationship with Cleopatra was almost emasculating. But it sounds like a lot of that is just Octavian not wanting to mention Mark Antony so that he can make it sound like a foreign war, right? Is that a fair
I
thing to
think
say?
it is. And I think as well that if you can kind of look back to the way that certain individuals have been portrayed, you get the same sorts of narrative going on. So if you look back at the way that Alexander the Great is portrayed, the idea that he loses it by, becoming very stern, very decadent, drinking a lot. So I think some of these insults are a bit generic. But yes, I think that the way that Mark Antony is portrayed as this sort of decadent drunk is a way of diverting some of the things that are also going on at the time. we talked earlier on about Rome perhaps wanting Egypt. You know, in a sense, it's a power grab, isn't it? And it's Octavian making sure that he has control of it rather than Antony does. When Rome finally takes control of Egypt, Octavian will ban all important people from going to Egypt without his permission, because he doesn't want anybody to use it as a power base in the future. He knows that that's a possibility.
Sounds strict, but perhaps justified from his perspective. So Actium is over.
Yeah.
Where does Mark Antony go next? And then what does Octavian do?
Well, this is the sort of the story that quite a lot of people will be familiar with, because it's been romanticized so much by people like Shakespeare. The double suicide of Antony and Cleopatra. It's not quite like that. Depending on who you read, he goes first. He'll take his own life first. And to be fair, that sort of fits in with Roman culture. So amongst Roman aristocrats, the idea of taking your own life to preserve your honor is entirely normal. Okay, you get lots of examples of people having done that, like Cato the Younger, etc. Cleopatra, not so obvious what she's doing, but the sources seem to suggest that she wants to see whether she can, use her seductive powers on Octavian, maybe to cut a deal, because it's clear that she thinks, well, unless I do something, Egypt's going to go to Rome. So I need to try and maybe do what I was doing with Julius Caesar, maybe with Mark Antony. It makes it sound very clinical, but I think it's a good strategy. Octavian will reject this, so she takes her own life. Or maybe she's killed. We don't know. The sources suggest that the famous story that she uses a snake to take her own life. But it is speculation that maybe Octavian had a hand in her death. It's unclear, because it would have made more sense for Octavian to take Cleopatra back to Rome as part of his triumph and then publicly humiliate her, which would be the normal way of doing things. But he would want her out of the way, definitely. So it's possible that he had her gotten rid of, should we say. But they're both dead. So that's it. And then Rome takes control.
So Mark Antony's dead, Cleopatra's dead. What about Mark Antony and Cleopatra's children? What happens to them?
Well, there's a sort of a weird thing going on, and we can kind of work out reasons for it. Octavian will allow some of the children to survive, but others to die. So the main person to be gotten out of the way is Julius Caesar's son, Caesarion. He has to be removed, because even though he's not seen as legitimate by Romans in terms of, there was no legitimate marriage between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, he's still seen as a bloodline connection to Julius Caesar. Therefore, he is a threat to Octavian. So what happens is that the children of Mark Antony with Octavian are allowed to carry on, and the children of Cleopatra and Mark Antony are allowed to carry on. So it's quite an interesting. It's quite interesting how Antony's family is integrated later on, because if you actually trace the Julio-Claudian family tree down, you will find that the relatives, the descendants of Mark Antony, are very firmly embedded in the Julio-Claudian line. That's on into the future, but we will find that the children of Mark Antony go on. In fact, you could argue that they go on to exercise more of an influence in the Julio-Claudian line than Augustus's own family. So,
well, that's good for Mark Antony in a way. Yeah. Bless him.
I am, no.
So we talk about Caesarion being killed because he's a threat to Octavian.
Yeah.
Can we tell what Octavian is intending to do at this point? Is he intending to restore the Republic?
Well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because the triumvirate is dissolved, and the triumvirate was always meant to be something that theoretically was temporary. It's a thing that has to be renewed. So when we've had both of the triumvirates, it's always been a 5-year thing, and then they renew it. So, yeah, as you say, the triumvirate is gone. He's got two options, really. He could either make himself a dictator, which you won't want to do because that didn't end too well for Julius Caesar, or, as you say, he could restore the Republic. But at the moment, he's still off abroad. He's not back in Rome yet, so he can kind of delay any decisions. He's been consul once in 43. He's consul in 31, and he'll be consul for quite a few years to come. So he's got power. He's not going to make any decisions till he gets back to Rome.
Okay, so when he gets to Rome, what can
Yep.
we see him doing?
The thing that he does that the history books are very keen to talk about is he makes a political settlement, and this will be in 27 BC. And he does formally restore the Republic. He says he restores the Republic. He's quite open about this. This will be something that crops up in his own history of his life, the Res Gestae. He restores the Republic, and he changes his name. Okay, he changes his name to Augustus. So when we're talking about Octavian, Augustus, Octavian before 27 BC, Augustus afterwards. We are told in the sources that he did think about calling himself Romulus, because Augustus is a sort of an invented name. It means holy one or revered one. But he was advised, no, don't go for Romulus.
Right.
It's too much of a connection with kings. You don't really want to go down there. Though it is going to fit in, the idea of Romulus is going to fit in with what he wants to achieve. So it's not so odd, because he will use the imagery of Romulus a lot in his own image making. But yeah, the connection with kings is too close. He is consul. He's been consul in 31. He will be consul all the way through to 23 BC. That should be raising alarm bells for people, because you can't be consul every year. There were lots of laws in the Republic that caused a lot of rows about how often you could be consul. There are rules that set down that you need to have gaps between consulships. But he doesn't have that. He stays consul. What he does do as well is he gives himself quite a lot of powers, and the powers come from his control of the provinces. He gives himself charge of all the big provinces and all the armies. And we're talking about Gaul, Spain, Syria, and Egypt. So all the most recently acquired provinces with all the trained soldiers, all the ones that have got the biggest amount of legions in, and he takes control of them. And that at this point is how he sort of has his power. So he's said that he's restored the Republic, but actually, if you look at what he's done, he's still consul all the time, and he has huge numbers of troops abroad in all the main provinces, all the ones that would have been likely to revolt at this point. So he's still very much in charge. Now, you can imagine that the people around him would be saying, well, he hasn't restored the Republic, really. That's not the Republic we know. You can't be consul every year. He's got all these armies. You can't do that. You can't have one person having all these things. But they let it go. Nobody really challenges him on it. And I think the reason for that is because it's the post-war period. They've got peace. And they haven't had peace for quite a long time. And it's one of the things that I think allows Augustus to have a bit of a free pass, is that he does a lot of things which aren't really legit. But because he's restored peace and he's got stability in the economy, people just go, fine, that's a sacrifice we'll make.
I think that's a really important point, because when we're talking about the fall of the Roman Republic and these constant civil wars, we're often focused on the people organizing these wars. But what was the cost of the average Roman living in Italy from all of these successive wars? Because they really, really seem to want peace, even if it means just letting someone take more control than they're supposed to. Are they just so exhausted that they're willing to accept this now?
It's often hard to know what ordinary people think, because we never really know from the sources what they think. History is written by rich influential men, usually, about rich, influential men. So we always get the sense that the arguments that are going on in the Republic are very much about individuals obsessed with their own ambition, and warlords fighting against each other. I think for ordinary Romans, it's the sense of uncertainty. It's the effect on the economy. It's things like land. It's the idea of having some sort of set that you've got an economy that's working, that you're not going to have pitched battles. You're not going to have Rome invaded by different generals at various points. And of course, when you have stability, that's when you can start to get things like investment and people start to plan for longer term projects. Now, these were things that were starting to come in under Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar had this sense of, I'm going to do stuff that's long term. So I'm going to start building things. I'm going to start, putting down infrastructure. And that's something that Augustus will be very, very keen to show that he's doing. I'm building stuff. I'm building not just temples and big, important buildings. I'm building aqueducts. I'm doing roads. Sure. I'm making you feel that you don't have to keep looking over your shoulder all the time. And it's one of the main things that Augustus will push throughout his reign, the idea that I have brought peace. I've not stopped fighting people, but I'm fighting people at the edges of empire, and I'm bringing in, more slaves and bringing in more land. It's not civil war. You in Italy, you're going to have a great time. So it's peace. Yeah, it's peace is the thing that I think possibly blinds people to this. But there's the historian Tacitus who's writing in the 2nd century AD. Now, we've lost quite a lot of what he has to say about the Julio-Claudians, and most of what he's said about Augustus has gone. But he does say that he says that Augustus almost seduced people through the idea of peace. That Augustus got away with all the things that he does politically because he brought peace. And we can make comparisons nowadays with any politician that says, as long as the economy's okay, as long as your mortgage comes down, as long as, you've got jobs, you'll turn a blind eye to things that maybe I'm doing that are perhaps a bit dodgy or things that you might not like. And I think that's exactly what happens with Augustus.
So you've spoken about him coming home. He's become consul several times. He's clearly not wanting to step back and take a less public life. Does he stand up at any point and say, you know what, I want to be emperor? Because we know him as the first emperor. So how does that happen?
He has to play very, very carefully because he's seen what happened to Julius Caesar. And what happened to Julius Caesar isn't necessarily down to the things that he was doing. I mean, he was assassinated, I think, because aristocrats saw that Julius Caesar being in charge was a block on their own political ambitions. But we're told that the other reason that he was killed was because he was ostentatiously acting like a king. So we're told that he had like a golden throne and that he wouldn't stand up for the Senate, and he had lots and lots of statues made of himself. And it was clear that he almost wanted to be a king. So Augustus has to go, well, I want to be like Julius Caesar, but there are certain things I can't do. They didn't work. So Augustus has to go through a charade, essentially. He has to accumulate powers around himself, but he has to make it look like they are not official powers. So quite a lot of what Augustus does is about managing his image. So a lot of what he will end up doing will make it look like he's doing things almost reluctantly, or the powers that he has are unofficial, down to his reputation, or that people have given him stuff to do and he's sort of said, I don't really want to do this, but I will if you insist.
Right.
And he will also cultivate an image of humility and being very low key. So if we read in Suetonius, we get various interesting stories, like he puts it out that his wife Livia and his daughter Julia make all their own clothes. So they all wear homemade clothes. That he has simple tastes, that he likes doing the things that ordinary people do, like gambling with dice or going to watch the chariot racing, that he has a sort of a fairly plain way of speaking. So it's not an elevated, very educated kind of way. It's more speaking the tongue of the common man. This sort of imagery that I'm not trying to be a king. I'm not trying to have a golden crown. And, I am somebody who's mostly ordinary, but at the same time, he will also be implying in the background that he's somehow partly divine. And that's to do with the fact that fairly early on, he deified Julius Caesar. He made Julius Caesar into a god so that he could call himself son of a god. And that's what you'll see on all the coins of Augustus. DF, Divi Filius, son of a god.
That's quite the contrast.
It is. It's a good way for Augustus to ensure that people are very quick to follow him and to do what he says, because he has that added weight of I'm semi-divine. So any law that I put into practice isn't just a secular law. It's the son of a god telling you to do these things. How much people believe this, I'm not entirely sure, but he does use it. This connection with Julius Caesar for quite a long time until he feels comfortable that people are respecting him for who he is. And then he starts to slightly sideline that and rely more on his own personal achievements.
So he's the son of a god who's just a normal guy. Does anyone use the word emperor in his lifetime?
The word that we've taken to be emperor is the Latin word imperator. But imperator doesn't actually mean emperor. It means general. It means somebody that has imperium, and imperium means the power to command. So imperium actually is something that consuls have. It's the power to be in charge of an army. So the idea of an emperor doesn't actually really exist at this point, certainly. And even later on, you'll actually get people being called another title rather than an emperor. What Augustus likes to call himself is first citizen, or first among equals. So
Right.
he's primus inter pares. So it's always the suggestion that he's like everyone else, but his general good reputation means that people will let him speak first in the Senate, or will sort of bow down to his superior advice. But he's not anything, he's not got a title that makes him better than anyone else. He's just a better kind of person. So why wouldn't you listen to him first?
So it sounds like a slow accumulation of different roles and ranks until essentially he is the guy in charge. Is there a point where we see everyone saying, okay, this is just how it is now? We are having a dynasty that's going to be in charge of us instead of someone who's going to relinquish power and have it from some other guy instead of their own family.
The interesting thing is that if we say that he's collecting this series of unofficial powers, how do you pass them on? He said that he's restored the republic, which means that for most people, that would have been the idea that you go back to a democratic system. So all these powers, all these things that he has, he cannot possibly leave them to anyone, because people around him were saying, well, that's a hereditary monarchy. You can't do that. Nonetheless, there are a series of successors that are lined up. People that he is grooming to, we don't know, take over in some way. He can't pass powers of consulship on. He can sort of maybe promote them up the ranks. Maybe there's this sense that somehow genetically the qualities of Augustus will be kind of transmitted into the people that he nominates within his own family. I would imagine, though, that the first time that he starts nominating successors would be the moment that people around him were saying, yes, this is a king we're talking about, because in a republic, you cannot possibly pass these powers on. But again, people don't seem to mind, and there are a series of successors that come and go, because Augustus ends up living a long time. So like Louis XIV, everybody that gets nominated dies before he does. So I think that's the point. And the first point that happens is in 23 BC, where the first person that Augustus has nominated, which is his nephew, Marcellus, the son of Octavia, not with Mark Antony, but with a previous husband, he dies. And there is a worry about who's going to take over, because at the same time, Augustus gets very ill, and he almost dies. Augustus is quite a weedy chap, if you believe later sources. He's not like the guy you see in all the statues and stuff, this person frozen at the age of maybe 30 or 40. He's quite short, we're told. He's got bad teeth. He's always ill. He's arthritic. He's short. He's got a monobrow. All these things, if you believe that, Suetonius. But he gets very ill every so often, and people do worry that he's going to die. And he almost does in 23 BC. The person he wants to take over does die, and then there's a worry about what's going to happen next. The person who steps up to possibly take over is Agrippa at that point.
So who is Agrippa to Augustus at this point? Is he a family member? Is he a friend?
Well, he starts off being a friend and colleague. He's of a lower social status than Octavian was when they got together. But he's a very, very capable and loyal general. And he's pretty much the second in command to Augustus at this point. Augustus gives him various important roles to do. And in the terms of the building of the infrastructure of Rome, quite a lot of what we still have is down to Marcus Agrippa. So the original Pantheon in Rome was commissioned and built by Marcus Agrippa. We've also had various aqueducts that are still around by Agrippa. But he does actually end up marrying into Augustus's family. He marries Julia. So Marcellus is dead, and then Julia is now married to Agrippa. Julia doesn't have really much choice in it, but...
Oh, right, okay. So the best friend becomes the son-in-law.
The son-in-law, indeed.
Now, if you walk around Rome, you will see various buildings that say this was built by Marcus Agrippa. Why is it that Augustus allows Marcus Agrippa to put his name on buildings, but isn't allowing him, perhaps, to take credit for things like battles?
I think it's being selective in terms about what you want to take the credit for. And I think that there are parallels to make between sort of modern leaders now. It's about what you would like to be, what you feel comfortable with allowing people to get credit for and things that you're not. So I think building temples, that's fine. People can be allowed to do that. Winning battles is more prestigious possibly. And Augustus is very keen up to a certain point to claim credit for himself for the battles. When he starts getting too old, then clearly he has to kind of allow the younger generation to take on. But allowing other people to sort of, put their names on buildings is something that Augustus is quite keen to do, actually. It's a way of people expressing loyalty to the regime, as it were. He's quite happy for them to pay for it as well.
We often hear about Augustus finding Rome a city built of brick and then leaving it in marble. That's great. We've also seen that sometimes it's his friends doing it. So what is Rome like when Augustus becomes the guy in charge, and how does he change that?
It's generally regarded as being a bit of a mess when Augustus comes to power. It's been through quite a lot of civil wars, obviously. It's a bit shabby. It's a bit run down. There's an awful lot of things that are temporary structures. For instance, really up to the time of Pompey the Great's theatre that is built in Rome, that they used to have theatres that were sort of built each year and then torn down. The idea being that they thought it was a slightly dodgy thing to have morally, therefore they didn't want to have permanent theatres. So they would build a theatre and then they'd pull it down. I think one of the things that motivates Augustus to beautify Rome is the fact that compared to Alexandria, it really was very second rate. So he basically wants to make Rome a world-class capital. Part of that will be to do with repairing things, and part of it will be to do with creating new things. He will end up finishing quite a lot of the things that Julius Caesar started, and he will build an awful lot of things that are new himself. And many of the things that he does are connected with building temples. And the reason that he does that is there is a general sense, and it's not just Augustus thinking this, these are other thinkers at the time. They think that part of the problems that have beset Rome over the last century or so are down to the fact that Romans aren't religious enough. They are not doing what the gods tell them. Right. So Augustus will very much pitch himself as a religious person. And part of that will be he's going to restore lots of temples and he's going to build lots of temples. So some of those things will survive down to us. Possibly the most notable Augustan religious building that we have is the Ara Pacis, the Temple of Peace, which you can still see in Rome in a very nice museum by the Tiber.
Yeah, that is a beautiful building. Highly recommended if you're in Rome, because I know a lot of people skip it. So he's building in Rome and he's making the city beautiful. We've talked about wanting to do things for the citizens themselves, partly, to ensure their loyalty. What are the kind of things that he's doing, for instance, with culture?
It's a very big thing for Augustus. In fact, when you look at Augustus's reign, quite a lot is to do with the vibes, as it were, is with the feelings that
Right.
are engendered rather than concrete things that he does in terms of changes in laws. He's very, very keen that this is a reboot under him. He's restarting things. So he will pitch an idea of a golden age that he will preside over, where everything will somehow revert to an idealized past. There will be a great flourishing of art and culture, that there will be a period of peace and prosperity and fertility. So many of the motifs that we see are connected with bountiful crops, lots of people having babies, a general feeling of optimism for the future. So we can see those images on the Ara Pacis of, lots of plants and lots of cornucopias and people having babies. And we have marriage laws that are brought in by Augustus in 18 BC, which is all to do with encouraging the right sorts of people to have babies, have lots of big families, lots of tax breaks. And in 17 BC, he has something called the Secular Games. And the Secular Games are a big celebration of a brand new golden age, a cyclum, which is a period of about 110 years. There is a big festival in Rome. It's generally something that people will think this is a brand new age. Augustus is ushering in this age of prosperity and peace. And I think people seem to have bought into that.
Definitely, I think that would be true. What about writers and artists at the time? Can we see him particularly patronizing certain writers?
There are a group of writers that flourish under Augustus. They are many of the big names of Latin literature, particularly Virgil and Ovid, Horace, Propertius. These are all people that they are a loose collective. Some of them are certainly being paid by the regime, not necessarily to be a mouthpiece of the regime, but certainly paid to produce literature. The person who procures these people, acts as a literary patron, is someone called Gaius Maecenas. Maecenas is the third big member of Augustus's government. He's not a military figure in any way, but he basically collects together these poets, and these poets will often praise Augustus in their work. So we get quite a lot of poetry that is talking about how great the Battle of Actium was, how great members of Augustus's family are, praising peace, praising the Golden Age, praising Augustus's ancestry. The Julian family say that they can trace themselves back to Aeneas and Romulus and Remus. So there are poems that all seem to have the same themes, and scholars are divided as to whether or not these people are acting independently. They just all like Augustus. This stuff is coming out, freely. And other people are saying, well, there seems to be a tick box of themes and motifs that appear in all of them. Are they being paid? Some of them get paid very well. So we don't know to what extent these people are fully on board with Augustus's program of reforms and changes, or whether simply they know that's where the money is and they're writing to order.
So when we talk about him doing a whole reboot, we do see some beautiful monuments that still stand to this day. We do see an explosion in literature that we still read to this day. What about politics and economy? Is he good on politics and economy?
We have conflicting sources about how happy people are politically. Suetonius tells us that there are assassination attempts, that behind all this lovely, happy, optimistic atmosphere, there is a certain amount of paranoia. Politically, I think Augustus is panicking slightly because he's aware that he's not immortal, even though that's one of the things that he likes to kind of push out as an image, that he is sort of immortal. That he knows that this coalition of powers that he's got can't last forever. That sooner or later, somebody will want the Republic properly to come back. And it's this period that it's more likely to happen, this close to people remembering what the Republic was. He seems to have largely managed people's expectations, and I still think it's to do with the power. There are no massive problems in terms of the economy at this stage. Augustus is still adding provinces to the Roman world, not in the sense somebody like Trajan later on is going to do, where going on big campaigns, but Augustus is very clear that he is bringing people in. Some of them are being conquered, but some of them are also doing deals, shall we say. So there is a certain amount of diplomacy going on. It seems to have been a period of relative prosperity and calm, which is, as it goes on, makes it easier for Augustus to worry less about his own position, but he's still concerned about who's going to come next. And that is something that is bubbling under the surface. So, and behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of political machinations going on. Who's going to take over? There's rivalry between two sides of the family. He's having to manage that, and what that might mean in terms of what comes next.
So that was part 1 of our introduction to Augustus. We hope you enjoyed it, covering his childhood, his early career, and that deadly rivalry with Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So have a break, have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and join Mike and I in part 2, available now. We will be covering the image that he created for himself and Rome as he grew older, and whether his messy private life lived up to the expectations he held for other Romans. Also, was he murdered by his wife? Tune into part 2 to find out.